I'm Martina Blake, Services Manager with Arthritis Ireland, and it's great to see you coming back in again, and you're very welcome. And for anybody viewing on YouTube, you're very welcome as well. Thank you for joining us. Just to let you know, we're on session 5. I can't believe it. Session 5 already, which is unreal. Fantastic. And it's really, I don't know, it's been a really enjoyable webinar series, and hopefully you're getting what you need from it as well, and really enjoying it too. And as I say, the usual, it's the webinar is scheduled to last for 1 hour. We have Denis Ryan with us tonight, who's going to talk about pain and mental health. And as usual, if you want to pop any questions that you have into the question box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to answer as many as we can of them, okay? If there's anything there that you're particularly interested in, feel free to take a photograph or a screenshot of the slides. And as always, the webinar is being recorded. You'll be sent the link on Tuesday if you drop off, or if you miss it or whatever. And you'll get that link next week. And the webinar will also be available on our YouTube channel. And just to remind you, I'm sure you know this at this stage, we are the national charity for people living with arthritis in Ireland, and we're the go-to for all things arthritis, hopefully. We deliver support, training, education, and information on arthritis and everything related to arthritis. And just to remind you of our free national helpline, which is open Monday to Friday, 10 to 4. And that's for anything relating to support or information, or going back to work, or entitlements or benefits. And also it's an easy way as well to register for courses or find out about what courses are coming up. And that's our helpline number. That's our helpline number there. So that's all my piece done. So for now, I'm just going to introduce you to Denis Ryan. Denis is going to talk to us about pain and mental health. And Denis is a big advocate of Arthritis Ireland, and a big friend of the organisation. And it's great to have him here. We're absolutely delighted to have him here this evening. And for those of you that don't know, Denis actually worked with Arthritis Ireland before and wrote our Behind the Pain programme. So anything around behind the pain and the emotions and the mental health impact of living with pain, Denis is, is one to listen to, and I'm really, really excited about having him here tonight. And just invite you all to sit back, grab your tea or your coffee, and relax, and just hopefully you enjoy the webinar. Okay, thank you. We'll see you we'll say bye-bye for now. Over to you, Denis.
Thanks so much, Martina. I'm just going to share my screen. So you're very welcome, everybody. Very happy to be here. Like Martina said, I have a lot of fondness for Arthritis Ireland and the work they do, and used to be working there as a community support officer. So it's good to be back alongside them with this event. So my name is Denis Ryan. I guess in general, I'm a biodynamic and integrative psychotherapist. So I work with one-to-one clients with a variety of issues, and then I have this kind of special interest in chronic pain and long-term health conditions. So while I was working with Arthritis Ireland, I created a program called Behind the Pain, which was the mental health program for Arthritis Ireland. So that was looking at pain, working with different groups, and kind of delving into the theme of living with arthritis and the mental health issues that arise around it and support that's needed around it. I also trained as a living well facilitator, and I also created another self-management course for Migraine Ireland, again looking at the mental health aspect with chronic pain. So I have a bit of kind of professional experience, and then I guess personally, I don't live with arthritis, but I live with migraine. So I have lived experience as well of pain and the upheaval of long-term health condition. So that influences a little bit of this as well. So just to settle in for the evening, just to give a brief overview of the content. So what I think might be most useful this evening is just to introduce some frameworks. So it's such a broad theme, the idea of arthritis and mental health, or chronic pain and mental health. So I kind of like to kind of bring it a little little bit more concisely into our minds and use these frameworks so we can start thinking about our mental health and pain in a certain way. So I want to look at ideas of primary and secondary suffering, this idea of the window of tolerance, and then looking at our emotional reactions, and then look at supports, so different tips and tools that we can use and introduce to support us, like reducing stress, communicating our pain, understanding our needs with pain, pain reduction, pain distraction, and deceptive thought techniques. And ultimately, and I think this is, I guess, a general overarching theme for the whole presentation this evening, is kindness and compassion and acceptance, and finding that space within us just to be gentle with ourselves and kind to ourselves. So as we all know, living with pain is not a pleasant experience. So anything that we can do to be softer in ourselves is always beneficial. So if you want to just make yourself comfortable, I'm going to launch into the material. And like Martina said, if there's any questions, we'll have time at the end for any questions. I'm happy to answer anything that comes up throughout the talk. So first of all, I want to look at this idea of primary and secondary suffering. So primary suffering is the actual lived experience and the kind of physical symptoms of the pain. And the conditions. So we're looking at pain and flare-ups, fogginess, stiffness, fatigue, and possibly others. And with primary suffering, there's a range of supports. So I'm really aware of the amazing talks that have been happening the past few weeks that are also available on YouTube. So the supports available there, you have your GP, rheumatologist, medication, physio, nutritionist. We also might have holistic treatments and pacing management. So a huge amount of our time and energy when we're living with a long-term health condition goes into our primary suffering. We're really looking at the impact of the physical symptoms of the pain. And while this is, of course, completely necessary and very, very needed, there's a really strong impact of this, that we spend so much time searching for the cure, trying to just get rid of the pain, or surviving our primary suffering, that we really fail to give support to our secondary suffering and the emotional impact of living with pain. So this is such a huge area. We can't just deny our emotions of living with pain. And of course, especially if we're recently diagnosed or if we're in a lot of discomfort and a lot of pain, obviously our minds are going to go towards just wanting to get rid of it, or just trying to get any support at all to feel better. And while we're kind of on this journey to find comfort and release, we tend to deny all of the other stuff that comes up around pain, because there really is a strong emotional impact of living with it that we really need to acknowledge and really need to make the space to acknowledge in our lives. So one useful framework that I find with this is called the window of tolerance. So this was developed by a psychiatrist called Dr. Siegel, and he was specifically looking at ideas around trauma. And I find it really useful as a framework to look at pain and how we deal with pain. So if we look at the idea of the window of tolerance, Siegel described this as the optimum space for us to actually be in the world, so that we can learn, we can engage, we can communicate, we can find satisfaction and enjoyment. And then outside of this, we have stages of hyperarousal and hypoarousal, when we're kind of stretched beyond our limit and everything is a little bit too much, and we are forced to somehow go into survival mode. So part of the talk this evening, there's so much written about pain. There's incredible neuroscience. There's so much we could get into, but I kind of want to just simplify this into these frameworks. So ultimately what Siegel is talking about is these fight, flight, and freeze responses of trauma, which are basically survival modes. So when we're under massive discomfort and massive strain, our nervous systems get overwhelmed and we go into survival. And so with pain, pain catapults us out of our window of tolerance. And I kind of want to strongly emphasize this word, it catapults us, it completely creates upheaval in our lives. And suddenly we move from this, calm space of just being able to be in the world, suddenly into full survival mode. And so this is just naturally really, really distressing on our emotional body and on our lives in general. So one way I always think of describing pain is it's like a car alarm ringing. I'm thinking of Tuesday night and the fireworks going off for Halloween and just the distraction of the constant noise. And so if we think of, the core biological purpose of pain is to inform us that something's wrong. So if we touch a fire, then we know it hurts and we don't go near the fire again. But when we're living with pain, then it's this car alarm or this alarm system that's constantly ringing in our body without any off button or any mute button, and very little escape from it. So when we think of kind of what influences our window of tolerance, we're all under daily stress anyway, especially in modern day times. Things have gotten a little bit more stressful. So that's there. Then we have like the natural sudden changes in life, the upheavals, the unexpected losses or changes that we have to deal with. We might have unresolved trauma, or just trauma that comes up in life. We also have positive stress, the wonderful things that happen that, although they feel good, also put our bodies under a certain amount of stress and tension. And so when we throw pain into the mix, then we go into quite naturally an overwhelmed state. And so that alarm is ringing in our systems, and naturally we'll go into fight, flight, or freeze responses to try to escape to it. So with this, if we think of emotional reactions, so this kind of simplifies how most people react to pain and kind of puts us into two camps. So we could have blockers or we could have drowners. And this can overlap. Sometimes we might be in blocking patterns, sometimes we might be in drowning patterns. So it's always really useful for us to know our pattern. So our blocking pattern is the hyperarousal. So this kind of shows itself when we're keeping ourselves really, really busy. We're constantly juggling things. There's generally an irritability there. We're a little bit on edge, and that can come out in frustration and anger. And there's always some bit of quality of denial. It's kind of like, okay, so I'm living with this pain and I'm, having to properly sleep for 3 nights and I'm feeling quite foggy, but I'm going to keep on going. I'm just going to keep on going. So this is one reaction, which is the kind of fight reaction. And underneath that fight is I feel unsafe. I feel threatened. So somewhere in my system, I don't feel balanced. So I go into overactivity to try to compensate for it. On the other end of the scale, we have the drowning pattern. So this is our hyperarousal. So this is more of our freeze and flight response. So this is feeling completely overwhelmed and then withdrawing from the world, avoiding social situations or challenging situations, feeling down or feeling depressed, just generally feeling blue or low in ourselves, and then can kind of slide down quite quickly into helplessness and hopelessness. So this is really the collapsed position of giving up. I don't know what to do with my pain. It's all a bit too much. So it's better to just withdraw from the world in order to survive. I think survival is a really important word to kind of emphasize here, because essentially that's what we're doing. Our emotional responses are just trying to support us to survive, because something is happening in our bodies that we have limited control over, and we don't know how to cope. So of course our bodies are going to do what they can to survive by either keeping really, really busy or by completely shutting down or possibly switching over patterns. So again, with this, it's, and with anything that comes up in the talk this evening, if it lands or if it impacts you, it's the question of how can we meet this with kindness? So if you're sitting there thinking, oh God, that's exactly what I do, and I shouldn't do that, and I should do something better, I'll just ask you to pull back from the criticism of it and just note it. So take it as a point of curiosity, and really acknowledge that this is our bodies and our nervous systems working really, really hard to keep ourselves safe in whatever way they can. So in general, then, if we're kind of to expand on this idea of secondary suffering, we have different, symptoms of how this shows up. So we have our blocking and our drowning responses. There's also this theme of grieving the healthy body, which I really like. And there's a really interesting idea of grief when we're looking at living with chronic pain or living with long-term health conditions. So there's kind of theorists that would use the 5 stages of grief and kind of adapt it to the 5 stages of living with a chronic health condition. So it's kind of one of these words that when we throw in to these discussions can be quite impactful. However, as a framework, I find it really, really useful, because essentially that's what we are doing when we're living with pain or when we're living with a long-term health condition. Everything changes, and suddenly we're living with something that's completely different, completely new that we have to deal with, but we're also forced to leave behind our ways of living that we once had and the comfort of that. So part of this grief is the bargaining and the searching. So that part of us that just wants to cure, and I'll do anything to get rid of the pain, and I'll, head to the seventh son of the seventh son down the back arse of nowhere, and he has the cure, and it's a really natural response because we don't want pain. But what this does do is that it puts a huge amount of stress on us. So then we're constantly looking, constantly searching, trying to get out of the pain, and it's pulling us away from sitting with our pain, getting to know our pain, possibly accepting our pain. So again, what I'm really curious about is where we get additional stress. So yes, if I'm on the search for the cure, trying to avoid the pain, is that actually increasing stress in my life or decreasing stress in my life? So again, how can we find a place to be gentle with ourselves, be calmer with ourselves, be slower with ourselves, so we can actually meet what's happening in our body a little bit more? We also have the fear that comes up. Again, another really, really strong emotional response, and again, a really natural response. So when something's happening in our body and we're kind of under attack, essentially with pain, we're going to get really afraid. It might not be so conscious, but somewhere in our unconscious mind, fear is going to be there. So this can be really supported with our supports with primary suffering. So really, really connecting with our medical teams and healthcare professionals to support us to rule out anything else we might be worried about. Guilt, again, is another huge, huge part of living with a long-term health condition. The guilt of cancelling plans, the guilt of not being as present as we would like to be, the guilt of people having to ask us how we are doing and being, that one who's unwell or not feeling well or has to leave, or so it puts a huge burden on us. And what I'm always aware of is that our bodies are under so much stress anyway with pain, and then on top of it we get this layer of secondary suffering that just kind of weighs us down. So we might be having a really, really bad flare up, be in immense pain, and then suddenly we have to cancel a plan because of it, and then suddenly we're getting really tough on ourselves and feeling really, really guilty and beating ourselves up. And I just think this layer of pressure and additional pain that we put in ourselves really, really has to be acknowledged. So trying to avoid feelings of guilt or trying to resolve feelings of fear is really, really important. Another huge element of secondary suffering is our relationships, generally in life. So this could be relationships with work, relationships with partner, with family, with children, and also intimate relationships and how that impacts our sexual lives. So again, this is part of our lives change. So one thing I always think of with pain is like pain is a stranger that sometimes just arrives at our door. And so sometimes pain is the stranger that enters into our relationship, and suddenly it's no longer us and our partner, it's us and our pain and our partner. And so this creates a whole different dynamic in our lives and in our relationships that needs to be explored and looked at, because we can't just ignore it. We can't just continue on as things are. Something has changed in ourselves because pain is present, and because of that, something has changed in our relationship. And so this is really, really important to acknowledge the need for communication around this, particularly in our intimate relationships or in our close family relationships. And finally, we're looking at loss of identity. And again, this is back to grief. So who are we with pain? So now that pain is in my life, who am I? You know, am I the person with a disability, or am I the person who can't work anymore, or am I the person who can't go out as much as I used to, or has to give up that sport I loved? Or so our identity is really, really challenged with pain. And our identities are formed to essentially keep us safe. You know, our personas are these wonderful ways of being in the world, and without them we can feel quite vulnerable, quite empty, and quite exposed. So it's quite an impactful element of living with pain or a long-term health condition, is that we're forced to change essentially, and then it adds this existential quality to it of, well, who am I now with this condition, or what does this condition mean for me living my life? So alongside all of these sometimes overwhelming emotions that arise with living with pain, we have a range of supports to go to. So I'm going to look at a few of them this evening, namely reducing stress, understanding our needs, communicating pain, emotional support and process, pain distraction techniques, and compassion and acceptance. So just in case I forget to say, with any of these themes, I kind of just wanted to introduce them this evening rather than diving into them. So with any of them, if they strike your attention, or if they resonate with you, there's so many resources online, on apps, through Arthritis Ireland as well, that can help you expand on these. So not all of these are for everyone. So what I always say with people on courses or with clients is that if it clicks with you, if it resonates, if it feels good for you, and if it brings you comfort, then go with it. If it doesn't click, then maybe just park it and possibly come back to it if needed. So before we get into the supports, just one last thing to acknowledge is the pain cycle. This slightly horrendous cycle of pain that we can easily get trapped on, and completely understandable cycle of pain that we can get trapped on. So when we look at the kind of physiological elements of pain, we have our pain, we have our muscle guarding. So obviously our body is going to compensate to deal with the pain. That might lead to restricted mobility, muscle weakness and atrophy, decreased function, emotional and mental stress, and then pain. And we get stuck on this loop. So a huge amount of the pain cycle is the primary suffering and the physical impact of it. But there's this really useful and interesting part that I find, which is the emotional and mental stress. So when we look at it as part of the pain cycle, unsupported emotional and mental stress feeds the pain cycle. And so in terms of our primary suffering, we might have real limited control over it. So it's really dependent on our condition, on our healthcare team. So that's a little bit up in the air sometimes, but we do have control over our secondary suffering and our reaction to our pain. So for me, with the pain cycle, it's this kind of link in the cycle, the emotional and mental stress, that for me kind of gives us a little opening. It's like, okay, so if I can tackle that part a little bit more, then it helps me break the pain cycle a little bit more. If we don't break it, then not only are we feeding back into it, but we're also, again, putting more stress and more pressure on our bodies that are already suffering. So I always see this as an invitation to break something in the pain cycle. So what can we do to do this? Reducing stress, learning how to communicate our pain, understanding our needs with pain, looking at certain techniques which we'll look at, and ultimately kindness, compassion, and acceptance. So stress is one of these things that I used to have a huge trigger response when anyone mentioned it in terms of pain, because it's one of these things that we can't just eradicate from our lives. We can't remove stress. We live in quite a stress-based society. So stress management is a word that's kind of like thrown out a little bit too freely, I think, and a little bit limited in its results if we don't take it, not if we don't take it seriously, but if we don't put it under the right context. So when I talk about stress management with people living with pain, then we really have to distinguish between standard stress and stress living with pain. So it's like the chart earlier, it's like we all have stress in our lives, some negative, some positive, some quite extreme in terms of trauma. But the stress of living with pain is quite unique and quite different, and it puts our body under a whole different level of stress that we really have to acknowledge. So when we just throw out stress management like it's something that's easy to do, it's quite difficult to do when we're living with pain because our bodies are essentially feel like they're under attack. So just dropping stress or reducing stress is not as easy as it sounds. So while we may not be able to remove it, we need to be really, really mindful to keep it at a minimum. So one thing I always say is that for everybody in this society, we should all be managing our stress and we should all be looking at it. But for those of us living with pain, we have to be a little bit more mindful of it because actually it just feeds more into the pain cycle. It adds more pain and more suffering in our bodies that are already under enough stress. So one way to look at this is the impact of unresolved stress and trauma. So if we go back to our idea of the window of tolerance, if our window of tolerance is under a huge amount of strain, it becomes quite contracted. And when it's contracted, then our bodies again will compensate and our tolerance levels will really, really decrease. So any unresolved stress or unnecessary additional stress in our lives is going to impact our window of tolerance, and then our emotional responses to pain and to life are going to increase. Similarly with trauma, if there's unresolved trauma in our system, again, it's going to contract our window of tolerance and our capacity to deal with coping with what's happening, especially with pain. So exploring that or looking at it or seeing how we can resolve it or integrate it somewhere in our systems expands our window of tolerance a little bit more and gives us a little bit more capacity to deal with life. Another element of stress that I think is really, really important when we're living with pain, or particularly with an invisible disability, is the stigma attached to it. So we become that person with the pain, or that person with the crutch, or that person who has to cancel plans. And so while it might not be so overtly spoken in society, we feel it and we feel the impact of it. So that adds this other additional level of stress. And for some of us, it'll force us to want to do more or show people that we can keep on living or live just as well as everybody else, or add this like really, really unconscious pressure in ourselves. And essentially what this does is that it just increases more stress. So I just wanted to name the stigma and name the invisible disability and the unspoken stress that this puts on us. The next element I want to look at is the idea of communicating pain. So the first part of this is educating yourself on your condition. So be it rheumatoid or fibromyalgia or whatever arthritis or related condition it is, get to know it. So educate yourself. Arthritis Ireland have a range of materials on this and supports, and the helpline is there. Healthcare professionals are there. So really, really get to know it. So the benefit of this from an emotional perspective is that it removes a lot of fear. So the more we know, then the less we have to worry about. So one way to tackle fear in our system is to get a sense of knowledge and a sense of control around it. So really, really get to know it. The second part of this is to educate yourself on your condition. So one person's rheumatoid arthritis will affect them completely different than another person's. So not just in terms of the primary suffering and the symptoms, but mostly with the emotional suffering. So really, really understand your condition, how it impacts you, how it impacts your day-to-day life. So naturally, when we're in pain or when we have long-term health condition, we will have a natural aversion to it. We'll want to move away from it or not give it any space or time. And I'm always curious about leaning into it. So if we were to really, really get to know this pain, what would that look like, and what do we need to support us to do that? So again, this removes a little bit of fear, and also creates a different relationship with our pain and our condition that feels really unnatural, but actually brings a lot of support, because we can get to know it. And once we get to know it, then we can look at different ways of supporting it. If we don't do this, then we're kind of left with general tips or tools that may or may not land with you. But the more intimately you get to know your condition and your pain, then the more successful you'll be in supporting it and resolving it. The next part of this is finding language that works for you. So again, with this, like if you have a quick Google of dealing with pain or anything, there's so many tips and so many tools, and again, they're very, very general, and sometimes they don't match the way we want to communicate. So find language that works for you, find the words that work for you. There's certain things I would have found that just impact me. As a migraine sufferer, if someone asks me how's my head, I just, that question makes me instantly annoyed. So again, find language that works for you, and if you're in a relationship, find language that works for your partner. So how do you want people to address your pain? How do you want your loved ones to address your pain? How do you want your loved ones to check in on you? So again, this is down to communication. So when you say this, how's your back today, or your hands hurting again, it's really investigate, okay, does that feel supportive to me, or does that irritate or annoy me? And if it does, then communicate it. So could you phrase it this way differently, or could you just actually not acknowledge my pain today? So obviously I'm in pain, but I don't want you to acknowledge it. I just want to enjoy today. Or so finding this way to communicate within our relationships is really, really useful. The next part of this is to get to know your window of tolerance. So what is your capacity to deal with, not just with pain, but with life? So again, this is an invitation into ourselves a little bit more, to understand ourselves more, and then to understand ourselves with pain a little bit more. So again, this invitation just to expand a little bit more into our awareness of who we are and how we cope in the world. Similarly, getting to know our emotional reaction. So are we blockers? Are we drowners? When do we tend to fall into one camp or the other? Again, with this is that if we know it, then we can resolve it. Otherwise, we're just kind of flustering around, trying different things, and kind of moving aimlessly. So I always think if we want to move from A to B, then we really need to get to know A first. So if I want to move towards being better with my mental health in terms of my pain, then I really need to get to know my pain first. So know our window of tolerance and know our emotional reaction. So if I understand, okay, so these are things I go into full blocking mode, family events, I go into full blocking, and work, I go into full blocking. And then actually with my partner, I go into a drowning mode. There's information for me. And when I have that information, then I can move out of it. Then I can look at different tips or tools or strategies to change that. But that has to start with knowing it first. And the final part of this is understanding that not everybody will understand. So we're on a journey to understand our pain, and we're on a journey to understand the impact of it. And we're being kind of stretched and pulled, and the rug is being pulled out from under us in so many different ways. So we're in an unsettled space already, and sometimes it's deeply frustrating when other people just don't get it, or don't see us, or don't fully understand. So part of this is that we need to have this compassion for ourselves, but we also need to extend some of that compassion to other people in our lives, who are possibly trying the best they can in different ways. But sometimes they won't, and generally they can't understand, because your pain is your pain, and nobody will fully understand the impact that has on you. So it's extending a little bit of space and compassion to those who don't understand. The next part with this is something I've used in groups before and with clients. So I'm sure we're all kind of tired of the pain scale that we might have used with our GPs or with our consultants. Um, so what I do with this is that I add another element to it. So instead of just investigating our pain and what it feels like, I add another thing of what do I need. Um, so with the what it feels like, this is really going down to again getting to know it. So knowing exactly, okay, it's that certain sensation or that level of pain. And again, giving it time and space to intimately get to know what this pain feels like or what this pain level feels like. And then alongside that, it's what do I need? Um, so we might just need to lie down. We might just need to cancel work. We might need to contact our GP. We might need to go to A&E. But it's mapping it all out. So what I find this is really, really useful for is communicating. So if you're tired of the question, how are you feeling today? Or how's the pain today? Sometimes it's really useful just to say 4 or 6 or 7 or 2. And if your partner or a family member has this list, and if it's communicated to them, then they might know that you need rest or you need space or you need them not to bother you today, or you need space from the kids or whatever it might be. So again, taking the time to sit down and understand your needs with pain and then finding a way to communicate that to the people who need to know can be really, really useful, because ultimately it takes some stress off us. So we can say a number instead of going into the explanation. The next part I want to look at is just general techniques. So we might be aware of kind of general pain reduction techniques. So this kind of falls under a little bit more in the realm of primary suffering, I guess. So it could be hot and cold packs, gentle stretching or exercise, or holistic treatments. So one general failing with pain reduction techniques and pain distraction techniques is that we set up this expectation of it removing the pain. And what we're way more interested in, and what's way more valuable, is just reducing our pain. So if my pain level is at a 7 and I use any pain reduction technique and I get it from a 7 down to a 5, that's a win. You know, that's great. So some people try these things and say, oh, well, that didn't get rid of the pain. But if we just pivot our intention a little bit and look at reducing our pain, then we might find that some of these things can be really, really beneficial for us. Similarly with pain distraction techniques, so there's a range of these. We can look at body focusing techniques. So really, really tuning in with different aspects of our body. So particularly when we're in pain, the pain will get all of our attention. So for example, if my hips are aching, then all of my attention will be going to the hips. So body focusing techniques is really, really useful to kind of bring our awareness to other parts of our body. So while there might be one part of our body in absolute agony, there's another part of our body that might be feeling really, really well or really, really comfortable. So part of this is to bring our mental awareness down and around the parts of our body that feel good, and so diverting our attention away from the pain. So that's a little bit body focused. Mindfulness would be another kind of branch of this. So again, giving ourselves space to sit and be, really understanding the pattern of our thoughts and where our thoughts go, and giving ourselves space to slow everything down. So again, if we think of the idea of the kind of pain alarm or the car alarm happening in our bodies, everything gets very, very quick and overwhelming. So mindfulness, body focusing techniques, again, breathing techniques, or just simple counting techniques, just slows everything down. So when we're in that hyperarousal state or hypoarousal state, all of these techniques help us bring us within our window of tolerance again. So they kind of reduce that chatter and overwhelm and just bring a sense of calm. So anything that we can introduce that brings calm, soothing, and reduces our pain anyway is always really, really useful. The other part of this is deceptive thought distractions. So when we're in pain, again, when this alarm is going off, our thoughts can get really, really deceptive. So if you imagine walking on the street and standing beside a car alarm that's going off, you wouldn't be thinking so clearly at that moment. Or if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and there's loads of clutter happening around you, you wouldn't be thinking so clearly, and you wouldn't be communicating so clearly. So I'm really aware of deceptive thought distractions. So I always think in terms of pain. When pain comes, then I batten down the hatches a little bit to my internal thoughts. So don't believe your thoughts when you're outside your window of tolerance. So these are the places when we're in overwhelm, or when we're in a hyper-arousal state. We might get really, really angry, lash out to our partners, get overly frustrated with the world. Or when we're hypo-aroused, we might go into absolute despair and hopelessness. And so while these emotional states are completely understandable, that they're also really, really deceptive, because then we start believing them, and we start believing that, yes, nobody cares about me, and we should reject them, or we believe that this will never end and I'm fully helpless. And so these thoughts can enter dangerous territory if we give them too much attention. So alongside pain distraction techniques, I'm always curious about deceptive thought distractions. So different things like this, like just humming or using affirmations. So different kind of soothing or supportive mantras or thoughts, or even listening to a podcast or throwing on a movie. Anything to keep your mind distracted from going into that overwhelm is really, really useful. And then when you're back in your window of tolerance, or feeling a little bit more capable in the world, then you can make decisions, or then you can have necessary communications with loved ones. But while we're outside of the window of tolerance, batten down the hatches and don't believe everything you think. And so finally with this, we're looking at kindness and compassion and acceptance. So our main theme with this is let yourself off the hook. Your body is under enough pressure as it is. So that has to be really, really acknowledged. So any additional pressure you're putting yourself under has to be addressed, and has to find a way to let go of it a little bit. So this is really about going gently through life, going gently through yourself. And again, these are things that everybody in the world should be looking at and addressing. But when we're living with pain, our window of tolerance is a bit more stretched. So it's kind of like we need a little bit more kindness with ourselves, and a little bit more leeway with ourselves to let ourselves off the hook when necessary. As part of this, it's being really, really aware of our self-talk and being kind with ourselves. So many of us will have a really, really strong internal critic. So wanting to give out to ourselves, being really, really tough on ourselves when we're feeling low, or when we've had to cancel the plan. And if we actually, recorded some of these internal talks or internal dialogues we have with ourselves, that there's things we say to ourselves that we'd never say to anyone else. So I always think with this, it's like if your best friend was sitting beside you, or if a 4-year-old child was sitting beside you, would you say these things to them? If they were in pain, or if they were really, really overwhelmed, would you tell them to cop on and get over themselves, or get out there, or stop complaining? Or we absolutely wouldn't. We'd be present, we'd be kind, we'd be really, really supportive. And so many of us are so able to give that to others and provide that space for others, but giving it to ourselves can be really, really challenging. So again, in terms of mindfulness, being aware of our self-talk, so really getting to know it, really understanding that critic and calling it out, and choosing a different script, choosing a more supportive way of talking to ourselves, can be really, really, really important. So again, if you were ever at the receiving end of someone giving out to you when you're not feeling well, you know that your body will go into contraction and survival mode. It'll just put on more stress. And so similarly, when we talk to ourselves with that tone of voice, or with those harsh words, our bodies are going to have to compensate and survive it a little bit. So gentle self-talk, self-soothing, being really, really kind to ourselves. Yeah, I can't emphasize this one enough. Another part of this is the idea of living with rain. So this is came from one of the facilitators from the the pain course, and I really loved this analogy. And so she spoke about how we live in Ireland, and we live with rain, and we live with a lot of rain. I'm down in Cork. We've been flooded quite a lot, so it's just a reality that we live with rain in Ireland. So we have choices with living with rain. We can stay in our houses the whole time and just never go outside. We can potter about in shorts and t-shirts in the winter and just ignore it. We can spend the days at the window shouting at the clouds and the rain. We have all these options, but ultimately we live with rain. We live in Ireland, and this is just a reality. So similarly, we are living with pain. So we can withdraw, we can hide, we can motor on as if nothing's happening. We can get frustrated at it and kind of shut down. But ultimately, we live with pain, and this has to be acknowledged. And then when we acknowledge that we live with pain, then it's okay. Then we can do something about it. Similarly, living with rain, then we can buy ourselves a good umbrella or some wellies. And do something about it. But until we reach that point of acknowledging it and accepting it, we can't really move. So one kind of false idea around accepting our pain is this fear that if I accept my pain, then it'll never go away. And actually, when we accept our pain, when we just understand that it's there, then we can look at ways of actually living with it and supporting ourselves in it. Because the tension of rejecting it or pushing it away or constantly trying to avoid it, that creates tension that just feeds the pain. The next part of this is looking for things that support you living with pain, not things that will just make it go away. So again, this is back to our focus on primary suffering and our neglect a lot of the time of secondary suffering. So if we look at this idea of actually accepting it, okay, this is what I live with, and again, this is a journey to get to. It's a very easy word to throw out, but it's a journey to get to acceptance. And sometimes we might find a day that we think we're okay with it, and then something happens the following week, and we're in full blocking mode again or full drowning mode again, and that's okay, and particularly in those moments, we need to be really, really kind with ourselves. So acceptance is a journey, and not just a destination that we stay in. We kind of tend to spiral with it. So on this journey, if we're constantly keeping check on things that support us living with it. So if this is my reality, what helps me? What supports me? What are my allies? What are my internal allies in terms of my self-talk or kind of mindfulness practice or just minding myself? What are my external allies in terms of friendships or loved ones or people who just care, or organizations like Arthritis Ireland? How can I surround myself with these things that support me with my reality? And the final part of this is don't suffer in silence. So again, this is back to this idea of our invisible disabilities. So when it's not seen, it can be really, really difficult, incredibly difficult sometimes. And so the tendency might be to not speak about it, or getting fed up of like, oh, I don't want to be giving out about my pain again, but when we reach that stage, then we start suffering alone and in silence. So with this, it's so important to stay connected. Events like this are so important. Organizations like Arthritis Ireland are so important. Community groups are important. Meeting other people with similar conditions are so important, because we need to know that we're not alone with this, because what we're under feels so deeply lonely sometimes. So anything that breaks that, anything that brings community support, again, more allies alongside us, really, really supports us in that. Because ultimately we're not alone with this. You're not alone in your pain, and there are so many people who understand it, and so many people who think that they're the only ones who are feeling what you're feeling. So when we take the time to reach out and connect with them, it can bring so much relief to our systems and to our bodies, because in those spaces and with those connections, then we can be really, really seen and really, really heard in all of us with our pain and our joy and our laughter and all the good things in life as well. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. And if there's any questions, we can go to them now.
Thank you, Dennis. You see all your getting thumbs up and claps, and thank you. There's lots of reaction there. It's great to see. That was just, I could listen to you all day. That was just really amazing, and your beautiful way of putting things as well, and and getting us thinking about things differently. And for me, I really loved that you framed everything within kindness and gentleness, and it was a really different presentation. So thank you for that, because to me this is so important. For us, it's so important to acknowledge the pain, and you came up with so many solutions for people too. It was really powerful. Thank you. We have a few questions here that people are really keen to get answered, I think. So I'll just read them. So somebody is on here. I went from blocking pattern to drowning pattern and ended up in a mental health care day hospital. I never knew that so much was known about pain and suffering. Why do GPs and rheumatology clinics not tell people that this could happen?
It's so difficult, and it's, I guess, just a general issue with our healthcare system. There's no time, so we're all well aware when we go for that appointment with our GP or our rheumatologist, there's so much happening around the primary suffering that they don't have time to sit down and just say, how are you? How are you getting on? So part of this, and I've kind of been on a journey with this myself, that I used to get very frustrated that they should do it. And then what I've realized now is that well, their job is just to deal with our primary suffering. So if we take some of the responsibility for that, then it's our job to find a therapist or a support group or something else that gives us that space, because we need it. It's necessary. But if we stay in that kind of dynamic of expecting our rheumatologist or our doctor to create that space for us, then we're left waiting, and we have a need that's not going to be met. So what I would say, if you recognize something like that, then it's like, okay, where can I get that need met? Because and then we have a little bit of ownership, and especially if we're falling into a drowning pattern, then that makes us sit up a little bit and do something about it, which can be really, really useful.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So somebody's a great question here too. Is arthritis related to trauma? And you already touched on this, experienced in childhood. The emotional pain is often worse than the physical pain. The behind the pain is excellent, and I find it really beneficial along with counseling.
It's a really interesting topic, and one, so I'm sure some people would be aware of the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. So I did a 1-year training with them, and so there's these ideas of chronic pain and long-term health conditions being rooted in unresolved trauma. And I guess personally, I like a lot of it, and I think a lot of it is true to a certain extent. But I also find it can fall into the kind of line of ableism and kind of shaming us a little bit. So sometimes the narrative says, oh, it's unresolved trauma, so suddenly now we're at blame for our pain. So I find something gets lost a little bit in those conversations. So what I always kind of think is that, well, first of all, we have to meet at the surface. We have to meet with absolute empathy of, this is really, really difficult living with this condition. And can we find a space that supports that? And then for some people, they'd like to go on a journey with it and understand, okay, maybe it's linked to this or that. And that's good for some people and useful for some people, but maybe not for everybody. Sometimes we just need to be heard with it. The one thing I will note with trauma is that trauma impacts our window of tolerance. So our capacity to deal with pain will be reduced. So again, it's down to this additional thing somewhere in the background that's causing additional stress. So if there's trauma that's kind of known, then there's always an invitation to resolve it. So
great. Love to, yeah, brilliant. Love it. Thank you. So somebody here has, as somebody with arthritis and other conditions that require a lot of medication, I have daily pain and suffer a lot from health-related anxiety. Can you offer any guidance, please?
So with health-related anxiety, then what I'd be really curious about are ideas of, if you were to break it down into emotions. So anxiety generally is just a mix of emotions that are a little bit too cluttered and we can't get a sense of. So what I'd be really curious about is going to the anxiety and kind of unraveling it a little bit. So is it, for example, fear that this is going to get worse or that it's always going to be that way? So if it's that, then that will need a certain amount of support. Is it guilt? Is it grief? Is it loss? So there could be a range of emotions happening. So when we're just looking at it from an anxiety perspective, it's really hard to tackle it. So I'd be curious about unraveling it a little bit, sitting with it, journaling with it, or talking about it, to get a sense of exactly what's happening with the anxiety. And then from there, you can kind of manage different pathways around it. And I'd also be curious about the idea of support. So what support do you have with you at the moment, and what support do you need?
Okay. Thank you so much. We're pretty much out of time. I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody's questions. But I think, to be honest, you covered a lot of the questions there in your presentation. And there was a few comments there. People really got a lot from it, Dennis. So thank you. And they're really appreciative of your gentleness and your approach. And I'm seeing lots of emojis here. So they're agreeing with me. It really was something special. So thank you for that. And I'm delighted, because it's fitting so well as part of the breaking the pain cycle. And to me, this is such an integral part of what we're looking to do. So thank you for that. I'm going to go back and do some more housekeeping. For everybody, just to remind you that next week is our final session in the series. I can't believe it. That's our 6 weeks up. And our final week is living a life with pain. So, looking at communication and relaxation and, finding our way through to finding me. And we have Laura Cahill on as well. And hopefully that'll be a whole recap of what we've covered and then moving forward. And in terms of moving forward, I'm going to be looking at, we offer a lot of training, supports, and different programs. So all our information is on our website, www.arthritisireland.ie. So if you're looking to dip a toe in with a course or a program, or, there's lots of videos on there as well, and information booklets. So if you're looking to find out more about your condition, there's lots of information on the website, which is really good. If you want to get active and find more about things that are happening, or campaigns, or activities that are coming up, sign up for our monthly e-zine. And just remind you about our Mindful Mondays, which is our blog. It's coming out every 2 weeks. And somebody mentioned about distraction techniques, Dennis. So our Inflammation Nation is our podcast series. So, it's always a good way to, listen in to something of interest to you or something that might help. And our YouTube channel with lots of videos and different topics of all sorts of conditions and, things of interest of living a life with arthritis. They're all on there as well. And just to remind you about our upcoming courses, we are planning our courses for 2024. I can't believe I'm talking about that already. So if anybody's interested in our Living Well with Arthritis or our Living Well with Pain programs, you can email to register your interest at training@arthritisireland.ie. And Joanne is on with me tonight, and she is actively looking for people for our Be Active with Arthritis programs and our Behind the Pain program, which we talked about tonight. So you can email Joanne at community@arthritisireland.ie. And it leaves me just to remember to thank Phrynesius Cabby for the support of the webinar series. And just to remind you, as I say, of our website and the helpline phone number. So, we talked a lot this evening about emotions and about pain and about, our mental health and, making better choices. So again, if you need a bit of support, if you want any clarification, anything, that's what our helpline's for. Our helpline is made up of people that live with arthritis. Everybody answering the phone has arthritis. They understand what it's like. And if you want to chat, if you want to rant, if you want to sound off, it's always a good option as well, just to lean, and as Dennis said, to lean into your condition and find out as much as you can. I really want to thank you all for this evening, for your attendance, and for anybody watching on YouTube, thank you very much for your support of the program, and wishing you all the best, and we'll see you again next week. Okay, thank you. Bye.